PIDs. Should you use them to control your still? That's what we're talking about today. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse, and this is Still It, the channel all about chasing the craft of home distillation and making it a legitimate hobby. PIDs are a topic that just come up over and over again in home distilling. Reddit, Facebook groups, forums, wherever you happen to hang out and sort of discuss these ideas, you're going to see it pop up multiple times. Spoiler alert, I'm going to say right from the very beginning that no, I do not think PIDs are a good idea in terms of running the element in your still. That being said, I do have some things at the end of the video, suggestions on different ways to use these things, because they're amazing pieces of tech. They're awesome things to have, but we'll talk about that at the end. For the purpose of this conversation, we're also talking specifically about reflux stills. Pot stills are another thing entirely. We can talk about that some other time if you want to hear about it. The general way people want to use these things is they take a thermocouple, they pop it at the very top of their still, they get a PID, they set the number or the temperature that they want to, offtake product from their still at, which represents a certain ABV coming out of the still. And the idea is that you run the still and the PID will take care of it so that you get a consistent product coming out the end. I will say that that is a simplified version of what the proponents of PID use argue. I'm not going to go specifically into the arguments for PIDs necessarily here. I'm going to tell you what I think. If you want to hear more on that, George and I had a lengthy discussion about this with Bearded and Board there as well. If you want to hear that discussion, I will put a link for the podcast down in the description below. To explain my position and thoughts on using PIDs to control the element in your still, I think we need to go back to basics just a little bit and talk briefly about how a reflux still works, because that's going to be important later on. First, let's talk about boiling points. Yes, methanol by itself will boil at 65 degrees Celsius and ethanol will boil at 78 degrees Celsius. A lot of new distillers will fall into the trap of thinking that if you can hold the temperature of the thing that you're boiling at, say, 65 degrees, all you're going to get is the methanol coming off first. You get rid of that, and then you move on to 78 degrees Celsius, and you're going to boil off the ethanol. Problem is, it doesn't work like that. The liquid will boil at the temperature that fits that conglomerate of all of the things in there. It's not just ethanol, it's not just methanol. You got acetone and water and all sorts of different congeners and potentially some sugar left over as well. You've got all sorts of different things going on, and that liquid is going to boil at the temperature that liquid boils at. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't make water boil at 120 degrees Celsius unless you put it under pressure and crazy things that we're not talking about for home distilling, right? A great way to illustrate this is if that idea was true. If you put something in a pot still and fired it up and started distilling, you would get all the methanol first, and then the methanol would stop, and then you'd get just ethanol coming off. It's just not the way it works. So let's just take that off the table right from the get-go, right? If you're new to the hobby, I get why that would sound logical, but it doesn't work that way, guys. I know we weren't going to talk pot stills, but let's talk pot stills just for a second to really solidify this idea in the newer members, the newer chasers' heads. So, we've got a pot still. We charge it with a wash. Doesn't matter the ABV, we're not going to talk specific numbers, that doesn't matter. We bring this thing up to a boil, so the liquid in here is boiling. Yes, it will favor the more volatile components in the wash. So, more alcohol is going to come out at the beginning than water. That is true, but because the still is kind of selectively removing some of the components from the wash, some of the chemical makeup of the wash over other things, the actual chemical makeup of the wash inside the boiler is constantly changing. As that liquid changes in its composition, its boiling point is going to change as well. This is the reason that when you run a pot still, you get a gradual decrease in ABV throughout the run. Now let's switch back to talking about reflux stills. Yes, with a reflux still, you can hit your 95% and keep it at a constant 95% offtake for a really large portion of that run. But there's a reason for that. We need to talk about how reflux stills work now. Let's pretend that this is our reflux still, the column on our reflux still. We have a pot sitting underneath it, we've got a wash in it, and we've brought that up to a boil. As the vapors rise up through the column, they get to a point where, with a reflux still, we get to decide what happens to those vapors. We could send them over into our collection jar, which would essentially just make it a pot distillation, and there's very, very little that you can do in that scenario to decide exactly what the ABV or increase the ABV of that product. A reflux still does something a little different though. It gives you the option to condense vapor at the top of the column and send liquid back down through the column, and that is what we call reflux. The reflux column will have some sort of structure in it. It'll either be plates or a whole lot of packing, and that gives the liquid going down and the vapor coming up the chance to interact with each other. The vapor going up strips the more volatile components out of the liquid going down, and the liquid going down takes the less volatile components of the vapor going up. And essentially what it's doing is causing a whole series of distillations to occur up through the column. Think of it this way. It's like taking a pot still, running the product through, collecting it here, putting it back in, and distilling it again. Each time you repeat that distillation process, the ABV of the final product is going to increase. The two things in a reflux still that are really going to affect the ABV of the final product, or the highest ABV you can possibly get to in the final product, are the amount of reflux that you send back down the tube, expressed as a ratio between the amount of vapor going up and the amount of vapor being collected. So as you reduce the percentage of vapor that comes over here and increase the percentage that goes back down, you have more power to create a higher ABV. The second thing is the amount of surface area that that vapor has the ability to interact on. A longer column with more packing or more plates is going to be able to more easily create a higher ABV over here. For the rest of this video, let's just assume that the height of the column and the amount of packing, the amount of surface area in the column is stock standard for everything we discuss. So let's think about one individual molecule within this system. It is going to go up and down and up and down, and maybe all the way up to the top, and then back down, and then up and down and up and down and up. Oh, and now it gets to go over. What I'm trying to illustrate is that there is a relatively delicate balance within this column. If we just let everything in the column drop out back to the bottom, then that process of refinement through repeated distillation has to start all the way from scratch again. The more we can increase the amount of product that's going up and down this column, the better we can start creating these fractions. So the more that we increase the percentage of reflux going back down through the column, the more we're promoting this to happen all the way up the column, and the more it allows us to fraction out the column in terms of ever higher ABVs going up the column, to the point where you take off here, you can be getting a really high ABV. So this is the reason that a reflux still can produce 95% alcohol for such a long time. You can run at 95% straight for 3 or 4 hours. If your still has the capability, with its surface area and its reflux ratio, of turning, say, a 4% wash into 95% alcohol, and you've got 12% in here, you're going to keep getting 95% until you get down below that 4%, let's say. So what does all of that have to do with running a reflux still with a PID? The idea is that you put a PID here, and it reads the temperature coming out of the still at the point of no return, which relates to the ABV of the products that you're getting coming off over here. If the temperature of the vapor here starts getting too high, indicating that the ABV of the product is getting too low, the PID will lessen the amount of power going into the pot. But what is that actually going to do to the still? All it can do is lessen the amount of vapor going up the still. Like we said right at the beginning, it can't change the temperature that this stuff boils at. It's going to keep boiling at the same temperature. It's just how much vapor is it sending up through the still. Because the still is a consistent size and a consistent width, the only thing that changes is the vapor speed going up the still, unless it gets to the point where it completely turns off and there's nothing boiling at all. Those are the two options. That's all it can do. I think we can all agree that just turning the elements off is not helpful at all. That's not what we want. But what happens if we lessen the vapor speed? We had a relatively intricate balance of vapor coming up and going down and up and down and up and down as vapor and liquid all the way up this still. If we mess with the speed of that vapor, if we push it harder and then pull it back, and then push it harder and then pull it back, it is not going to help that balance at all. The fractions that we were starting to create going up the still are going to drop down and be pushed up and drop down and be pushed up as the PID cycles different powers. But to me, that's almost not the biggest problem with what's happening up here. We know that if we're getting a lower than desired ABV on the offtake, what we need to do is increase the amount of reflux that's happening within the still. On the manual still, you can do that in, I don't know, hundreds of different ways depending on how your still's set up. For me, with the CCVM still, it's lowering the coil further down into the column. If you're using one of these guys here, it's putting more liquid into it at a faster rate, or putting colder liquid into it. If you're using a valve either for vapor management or liquid management, it's closing that valve off to allow less liquid or vapor out into the offtake. All of those things decide to send more reflux back down the still. Instead of doing that, what a PID does is just send less vapor up there in the first place. Admittedly, if you have a constant amount of water going through this thing and you decrease the vapor speed of what's reaching it, you will increase the reflux ratio. What you won't do is increase the overall volume of reflux going back down the still. So at the very, very best, what you're doing is making your reflux still run very inefficiently. Really, to be honest, what you should be doing is increasing the vapor speed, sending more vapor up here, but also increasing your knockdown power to send more of it back down the column. And that, my friends, is why I do not recommend using a PID for a reflux still if you're monitoring the temperature of the vapor and you're changing the input into the still. But, what if you used a PID and a servo motor to change the position of a CCVM coil? Or what if you used the PID to control an electronic valve that changed the amount of water going into your reflux condenser? You could use the PID to alter how open or closed a valve was on a Boca still, for example. I do think there's ways that you could use a PID to operate a still in a way that is more meaningful than changing the amount of energy that's going into the pot. Do I think it's better than running it manually? That depends on your definition of better. Is it going to give you a better product? No. It's going to be the same product, I would say. But are you into the geekery? Do you just want to crack open an Arduino and get to coding for the sake of the geekery and the chasing the craft of coding as well? All power to you. Do you want to set it up so you can run more accurate side-by-side comparisons in some way? There could be something to that as well. So I need to circle all the way back to the beginning too and say that, yes, I've tasted products coming off a still that were run with a PID in the way that I've just said you shouldn't do it, and they tasted great. Once again, go and listen to that podcast from George. He'll explain how he uses it, and I can see how he gets a product out of it. I just don't think it's a very efficient way to do it, personally. But if you are using a PID and you disagree with me, if you think it's better, drop a comment in the comment section below. That's what this place is for. I want this to be, oh God, I hate to say it, a safe space. But what I mean by that is that this is a place to discuss ideas. The best counter to a bad idea or a bad discussion or a bad conversation is a good idea or a good conversation or a good discussion. Shutting people down, refusing to listen to them, and blocking them out from a conversation gets you absolutely nothing. It pisses people off, it exercises people, and it does nothing good for the hobby. So if you want to discuss it in the comments. But guys, we're all humans. Be nice to each other. Don't be a cunt. Anyway, this is something that I've been meaning to talk about on the channel for a long time and articulate my thoughts on it a little better than the few times I have mentioned it. Thank you to the people that asked me these questions recently and recommended I make a video on it. I appreciate it. And yes, you will remain nameless, but thank you. I need to say a huge thank you to the Patreons. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate what you do for me. I couldn't do this stuff without you. If you're finding value in these videos or in the podcast or in the website or whatever it happens to be, and you'd like to help out and support Chase the Craft as well, you can go to chasethecraft.com/support and find out all the ways you can do so, including, if it's right for you, signing up for Patreon. Another message for those of you that are still listening. If you've been on the fence about getting a Chase the Craft pin or a Still flask, they are going to be on special at the moment. Unfortunately, guys, I don't have a choice. I just have to move fulfillment out of New Zealand. I can't keep up with it anymore. I'm sorry to the New Zealanders. I know that's going to suck for you. I'm sorry. Bonus for you guys in America though. Anyway, I need to clean out some of the old stocks, so check that out if you want in. This has been a blast. I'm looking forward to the conversation in the comments. It might be a little controversial. Keep on chasing the craft. Until next time, see ya.